Aeolian. All right, it's the 6th scale in the key, therefore it's the 6th chord in the key. The notes are E, F sharp, G, A, B, C, D, E. The intervals 1, 2, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 6, flat 7. The chords E minor or E minor 7, to which you can add the 2, 4, or flat 6. We'll come back and talk about that flat 6 in more detail later. I also want to talk about the interval shape of a flat 6. So we haven't had a flat 6 yet in what we've been doing. So the first scale with a flat 6. So the shape of a flat 6 in a 3-string pattern, from your root, your flat 6 is going to be on the adjacent string but up 3 frets from your root, right? So a 5th is here. Might be an easy way to look for it since most guitar players are pretty familiar with 5ths. Just go up a half step. There's your flat 6. In a 4-string pattern, I'll do this way up here. That same interval from your root, skip a string, go down 1, 2 frets. So skip a string, go down 2 frets. You're going to find your flat 6. So you need to go through all of your roots, finding all of those flat 6s, and memorize what those 2 shapes look like for the flat 6. Next step is stopping on the roots. So if I go down here, my 2 E's are here. So you do that, stopping on the roots in every position. Next step, record an E minor or E minor 7 chord. No colors in the chord. You're going to find out that this flat 6 interval is unresolved in the exact same way that the 4th interval is unresolved in an Ionian scale. This flat 6 is unresolved in Aeolian. How do you resolve an unresolved interval? Immediately after you play it within a beat, you move it down or up to the next note in the scale. So you have to play the adjacent note right afterwards in order to resolve the tension. All right, I'm going to give you a quick demo of that so that we can hear that this flat 6 is unresolved. So there it is, the flat 6, tension. The longer I stay on it, the worse it sounds. So it needs resolution. So that should be relatively obvious to your ears that that flat 6 is unresolved. So when you've recorded your E minor or E minor 7 chord and you do this step of running around on the notes to listen to the scale, you've got to remember that the flat 6 is unresolved. Now here's a coincidence that's not really a coincidence that we're going to talk about in more detail later. This flat 6 related to an E root is a C note. Same note that was unresolved in that Ionian scale. Now in Ionian it was the 4th interval, but it was still the C note. All right, that's going to come up in our discussions later. So it's a flat 6 in this scale, and you've got to resolve it. So get that sound together in your head. Next step, 3- and 4-string patterns. I will illustrate these. You've got to go do them on the various roots and then alternate the patterns and go through the usual routine. So the 3-string pattern for Aeolian is going to be, I'm going to start it way up here, 1, 3, 4, 1, 3, 4, 1, 3. That's going to give you the intervals 1, 2, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 6, back to 1. Flat 7 and 1, sorry. So fingers, 1, 3, 4, 1, 3, 4, 1, 3. Gives you the intervals 1, 2, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 6, flat 7, back to 1. Make sure you can think about that backwards. Then you've got to do that on every E root. Then you're going to do the 4-string pattern, which fingers for the 4-string is going to be 4, 1, 2, 4, 1, 2, 4, 1. So you do that on every root, adjust for tuning. Then you're going to find the tone center intervals within these 3- and 4-string patterns. Now, the good news is it's the same exact tone center as a Dorian tone center, 1, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 7. So the fingering shapes and interval shapes are going to be exactly the same. right? There's from the 3-string pattern, just like in A Dorian, identical. So this should be relatively quick to get this tone center together, but here's the 4-string anyways. So fingers 4, 2, 1, 4, 1, give you the intervals 1, flat 3, 5, flat 7, back to 1 again. So you get the full positions for that together. Okay, do that in all positions. Solo on just the tone center. Next step, add the 2, 4, and flat 6 in. Remember, when you put the flat 6 in, you've got to resolve it every time. Next step, the blues scales. Well, there's a standard blues scale coming right out of this E Aeolian scale, right? We already know that. So intervals 1, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 7, back to 1. You can also think of that as the E minor tone center that you just learned with the addition of the color 4. Same thing, right? So make sure you listen to E blues over this E minor chord. Then you can practice doing what we discussed before, which is start on the blues scale roughly for 10 to 15 seconds, and then add in the other 2 notes of the scale, which would be intervals 2 and flat 6. Again, the flat 6 needs resolution, so that you get a more melodic sound by adding in all of the notes. I'm not going to demonstrate that. You can go through and do that on your own. Next step, the other 2 blues scales. So we have B and A blues. Well, if you remember before, A blues had a C note in it and was not a good idea to use as a solo idea over the G major 7 chord when we were doing G Ionian. Same thing happens here, because remember, it's the C note. Even though it's the flat 6 in this Aeolian scale, it's still the C note. All right, so anything that has the C note in it is going to be unresolved. Therefore, A blues is not a good solo idea to use over the E minor chord. However, B blues works just fine. You're going to find out that it gives you 3 tone center intervals and 2 colors. It gives you 1, 5, and flat 7 from the tone center, and 2 and 4 as colors. So it's a good sound over the E minor. So you can practice listening to that. That brings us to Aeolian chords. So you have E minor or E minor 7 that you can play up and down the neck. You can work out the voicings on these yourself. Again, from the exercises that I gave you, you should be able to do that on your own. You can add the 2s and the 4s to the E minor chords. So you don't want to add flat 6 because it's unresolved. So you're not going to see written in songs or hear in songs, you know, E minor flat 6. You're just not going to see that very often unless somebody is trying to introduce tension on purpose. You know, maybe I'll give you a couple of these things. So the open position E minor, everybody knows this one. Right? So you can go down the scale. There's that tension with the flat 6. So that's the exercise of moving down the notes. Common E minor. These are all going to be basically the same common voicings for an A minor 7 that I showed you. Obviously, they'll be on different frets. Sorry. So there's an E minor 7. That's a common one. 1, 5, flat 7, flat 3. Let's see. This one. Okay, so what you got is flat 3, 5, 1, and another, what do you got up there? 5. So over that E root, that's what it sounds like. Then you've got either, you can do it this way, E minor 7. So you have 1, flat 7, flat 3, 5. You can do the barred version, which gives you an extra 5th. 1, 5, flat 7, flat 3, and another 5 over there, if you want to do that. This E minor. So I've got a 5, flat 3, 5 again, and a 1 on the top. And then that would bring us back to the barred version, which is the same as the open down here. So you can do all previous exercises with the E minor chord or E minor 7s that we've done in the past. And that's about it for our discussion on Aeolian itself. Now, because Aeolian has an unresolved interval in it, we're going to be able to make progressions that go unresolved to resolved, just like we did with Ionian. The reason that we didn't do this with Dorian and Mixolydian is because Dorian and Mixolydian have no unresolved intervals in them. Now, that doesn't mean, and I get into this in a lot more detail in the book, but I'll just do it briefly here. That doesn't mean that you can't have what are called Dorian progressions, because you can. But they don't have that same sound, that pull of unresolved to resolve. For example, if I played A minor to D, or A minor to D7, however you want to do it, most people would call that a Dorian progression, and I would agree. It's based mostly from this A Dorian scale, the A minor 7 chord here. There are a lot of songs written like this. Think old Santana. There are probably 3 or 4 songs that are in the key of G, just like what we're doing. Right, he's playing the Dorian scale over the whole thing. So there are progressions based around any chord in the key, but they don't all have movement and rest. So I can play this all day long and it doesn't have that sense of movement and rest. It's just, it's a chord change. Same thing with Mixolydian. You can play chords around the D7 chord and it's not going to have that same pull that it does when you listen to a resolved to unresolved to Ionian. Right? It's a big difference in the sound. Same thing is going to happen with the Aeolian. Now, because the flat 6 is what's unresolved, and remember that's the C note, it was the C note in the Ionian scale that unresolved the G Ionian. Therefore, all the chords in the key that were unresolved to G Ionian or the G major 7 chord, they're going to be the same chords that are unresolved to the E minor 7. Maybe you've heard a term called relative major and minor. A lot of times you hear that term and nobody explains what it really means. They just say, oh yeah, it's this major and this minor. Those are relative major and minor. Well, there's a reason that they're relative. And the reason is, it's the C note in each one of those scales that's unresolved. Therefore, when you have these categories of unresolved and resolved chords in relation to them, they're identical. Because they're identical, you could play either chord in either situation. You could play E minor 7 anytime it says play G major 7 or vice versa. And we're going to get into that in more detail when we do the next video, which will be resolved and unresolved Aeolian. See you in the next one.